Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to the show today. Thanks for tuning in and listening wherever you are and wherever this finds you today. Thank you so much for making this podcast a part of your day today. If you're not already subscribed and following the podcast, please do so you can get the episodes each and every time they come out. Also, make sure you head over to thelongerhaul.com. That's where the show notes will be today, as well as any of the old podcast episodes and some blog posts. You can also find there how to get on the email list, which I would encourage you to do, as those emails go out with some extra content that's not necessarily related to the podcast, but hopefully really practical and helpful for you there. Also, head over to the show notes page to find the link in order to join the super secret podcast group over on the Facebook. Several hundred folks in there on that as well. Just a great engaged group, super fun to head in and be a part of that group. Today, I'm excited for us to jump into the topic of changes in youth ministry. Old friends. They're both old friends of a long time now at this point. Zac and Chad from Youth Ministry Booster and Lifeway students on the podcast again today. They go way back with me, back when both of us were really starting the podcast, theirs and mine. And so just appreciate so much them, their heart for students and student ministry, the heart for the family that they have, just an incredible work they're doing. They talk to youth pastors all across the country in various contexts and settings. So they are for sure on the front end of all that's coming. And so when we step in and talk about changes in youth ministry, there are really few people I could think of that would know kind of the right things to bring to you as a listener that would be helpful and practical for you. So I'm excited for them to join us again today. Always a fun time to chat with them. There's no question youth ministry is changing, has changed, not necessarily just because of the pandemic, just because the culture changes. And because we minister to teenagers in an ever-changing culture, it's important for us to also be mindful of what changes we might need to be making as we go, and particularly changes that won't get you fired. That's the hope and the goal. So anyway, great conversation with these guys today. Excited for you to listen in as we jump in today to this topic of changes in youth ministry. With all that said and all that out of the way, we'll jump in here today with Zac and Chad from Lifeway students and Youth Ministry Booster. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to the show today. Thanks for tuning in and listening wherever you are and wherever this finds you today. Thank you so much for making this podcast a part of your day today. If you're not already subscribed and following the podcast, please do so you can get the episodes each and every time they come out. Also, make sure you head over to thelongerhaul.com. That's where the show notes will be today, as well as any of the old podcast episodes and some blog posts. You can also find there how to get on the email list, which I would encourage you to do, as those emails go out with some extra content that's not necessarily related to the podcast, but hopefully really practical and helpful for you there. Also, head over to the show notes page to find the link in order to join the super secret podcast group over on the Facebook. Several hundred folks in there on that as well. Just a great engaged group, super fun to head in and be a part of that group. Today, I'm excited for us to jump into the topic of changes in youth ministry. Old friends. They're both old friends of a long time now at this point. Zac and Chad from Youth Ministry Booster and Lifeway students on the podcast again today. They go way back with me, back when both of us were really starting the podcast, theirs and mine. And so just appreciate so much them, their heart for students and student ministry, the heart for the family that they have, just an incredible work they're doing. They talk to youth pastors all across the country in various contexts and settings. So they are for sure on the front end of all that's coming. And so when we step in and talk about changes in youth ministry, there are really few people I could think of that would know kind of the right things to bring to you as a listener that would be helpful and practical for you. So I'm excited for them to join us again today. Always a fun time to chat with them. There's no question youth ministry is changing, has changed, not necessarily just because of the pandemic, just because the culture changes. And because we minister to teenagers in an ever-changing culture, it's important for us to also be mindful of what changes we might need to be making as we go, and particularly changes that won't get you fired. That's the hope and the goal. So anyway, great conversation with these guys today. Excited for you to listen in as we jump in today to this topic of changes in youth ministry. With all that said and all that out of the way, we'll jump in here today with Zac and Chad from Lifeway students and Youth Ministry Booster.
Yeah. Not yes that it's been a long time. going? Yeah.
But yes, that we're back.
Oh, man. My heart has grown fond, Jody. It's been long enough now that my heart is strangely warmed and it grows fond. Yep. I think we're all in like different places in life since the last time we all convened, all three of us. Yeah.
Oh, 100%. But the funny thing is, like, the three of us, I mean, we text each other pretty regularly. We've seen each other several times at different things.
We keep up with each other. Not official, not podcast official.
Not podcast official, and not for the 13 listeners that listen to the podcast. But
but I think it's podcast OG though. I want to introduce Jody Livingston to the world because you're the one, man, that we called back. Oh, dude, I think by the time this one comes out, it will be 8 years. 8 years.
That feels like a long time.
Because
it is a long
one
time.
of the first. It is. 8 years is a substantial amount of time. Our podcast has been as true as my firstborn son. And so every time he walks around and gets like tall and lanky and has an attitude, I just assume that's where we're at too. And so, but you were the one we called, man. Like that was back then. You were the guy doing it that we felt like was approachable enough that we could call and still call you.
In other words, I'm the only one that replied.
Yes.
Yeah, sure. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. I sent 3 emails and you replied back. Yes. Thank you very much. Yes,
Well,
it was great.
Back then, there weren't very many youth ministry podcasts.
No, that's
there
true.
Were maybe 3 then, and I think you're one of the only ones who's still doing it now. So
yeah, most of them have quit or changed. Like I think the Simple Youth Ministry podcast became Download Youth Ministry.
Yeah, is there a little
for the
bit
most
of
part.
transfer there? Yeah.
All right, I looked it up really fast. Top song 8 years ago, so 2015.
Amazing.
Uptown Funk.
Oh,
still slaps.
That's still in my playlist.
Still slaps. There's churches that are still covering it today. Yeah.
Well, I will.
That meme of the Uptown Time Machine travel Back to the Future Christian drama, but it's fantastic. So
how can you not? It's the new Carmen.
It is
right?
so good. There's a Doc Brown.
People listening are like, "Who the heck is Carmen?" Don't Google it. It's okay. Yeah. Here's what's fun. I'll go back and link in the show notes previous episodes so folks can find this.
Okay.
So that'll be great. Maybe I'll listen to it first and then decide if I'm going to link to it.
Good.
Yeah. They're like, why should we trust these people?
Yeah. But lots happened in 8 years for sure. You guys have like grown a ton in terms of your ministry and what you're doing. Shifted a little, although not entirely. So how about for just folks listening who either remember you because they are still in youth ministry 8 years later,
bless
and
you,
still
brother,
listening to
sister,
this
bless you
podcast, they should be hosting this show.
Yep.
Or just folks who don't know you, maybe just take a second and introduce yourselves.
Or youth pastors that were entering middle school the last time we were.
Stop it.
No. Yeah,
oh my gosh,
interns,
stop it.
They were actually students in student ministry.
They were middle
youth
school
pastor
students.
Listened to us 8 years ago. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, stop it.
Yeah.
It's the longer haul for a reason.
Yeah.
It's the longer. We all look a little. There are some smile lines here and some gray in y'all's beards that would say we are on the longer part of the haul.
That's true. I'm on the back end.
Nah, man, you're about to peak.
Yeah, I'm in my prime, baby.
That's it, man. So I'm Zach, and this is my podcast partner, Chad. We started the After 9 podcast that became the Youth Ministry Booster podcast in 2015 and have continued to podcast in a weekly or bi-weekly manner. That's the thing, Jody. We bounce back around and forth. But over 8 years and 260 episodes into interviewing each other and friends in ministry and learning a whole lot along the way. We now serve on the Lifeway team. I serve in the student ministry specialist role, which means I'm a student of student ministry and I get to pastor youth pastors across the country. And it's been a joy because that was kind of the heart and the ethos of the podcast when it started. Was Chad and I were searching for the ways in which youth ministry could be a more supportive organization, conversation, institutionally. There's a lot of folks doing great relational work in their local ministry, but our heart and our burden was to care for the local youth pastor, youth minister, youth leader in the places in which they served. So,
yeah, and so I now serve as the parent ministry specialist at Lifeway, and so if Zach has that cool line of being the student of student ministers.
Student of student ministry and a pastor to youth pastors.
Well, I'm definitely not the parent of parent ministry.
The grandparents? Oh my gosh, there you go. Yeah.
I am also
but if you stay in this long enough, one day you will be.
I will say, grandparents do love you. Grandparents do love you.
I pull well with the older demographic for sure.
What's not to
Yeah.
love?
Yeah.
What's not
You
to love?
show up, tell a sweet story and a Dillard's button down, and they're in, man. They're
Oh,
in.
dude, I will swoon an old lady for sure. Yeah.
So what does a parent specialist do?
Yeah, so I oversee our area of parent resources. One of the internal initiatives for Lifeway a few years back was to create more resources specifically geared towards student ministry when it comes to parent resources. There seems to be more resources dedicated towards parents of elementary or even older elementary, but fewer and fewer at specifically directed towards parents of teenagers. And so for us and at Lifeway, we want to partner with the local church. And so the things that we're trying to create is hopefully helping the local church resource their parents. And so by no means do we want to say, here's how we believe that you need to parent your child, but we want to talk about discipleship that happens in the home and how do we as the church continue to help parents become disciplers of their kids. I think one of the things that we hear a lot, and that we've heard a lot over the last 8 years, is that parents are the primary discipler of their kid. And I would agree that that is very true. We often say that, but I think that there's a very different language that's happening inside of the churches. I think you have a lot of pastors that are saying, you're the primary discipler of your kid. Research would actually show us now that the majority of Christian parents believe that to be true, yet they feel very inequipped of how to do that. And so I
Mm,
think inside of the chairs inside of our auditorium, they're going, "What does that mean? How do I actually do that?" And so helping the church and parents speak the same language when it comes to discipleship at home allows us to partner really well.
yeah, I love that. I just literally right before we jumped on, I was in a meeting with our children's director
Mhm.
and talking through from student department and kids department, what does it look like as we lean into parents this coming year, trying to map some of
Yeah.
that out.
Well,
So
cool.
it's
I'd
good.
I o
Well, and
off of this episode, I'd love to hear what you guys are coming up with, what those conversations look like, because as we continue to 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 actually kinda launch some new resources, we wanna make sure that we are creating resources that don't just sound great in theory, but are actually working, because I think that if we're gonna be honest, and I think that's a good place to start from, helping parents disciple at home is a long road ahead of us. I
Yeah.
think that
yeah.
that is a hard, field to plow, and so I think we need to be honest about that, and also be people that are willing to lay the foundation to have that happen, because I think if it's just a knee-jerk reaction of, "Well, we tried it for 6 months and it didn't work," I don't know that something that monumental and that changing in the home is gonna be something that's quick.
Yeah.
Well, and that's kind of, I mean, you asked before the show started, Jody, just kind of life and what feels like a new season of ministry. I think there's probably two or three things that we would point to specifically on our Lifeway students team that are different in response to a post pandemic or a post 2020, 2021 age. One of those most specifically is parent ministry as a dedicated place of both investment and conversation, like adding Chad, not just to the team, but like literally building the position around him to kind of go run, explore, develop, do is a response to what we think are some of the changing trends or focus of what student ministry, youth ministry should be. I
Mhm.
think for a long time, parent ministry was always a piece of the conversation of don't just communicate to the student, connect with the family as well. But I think there's even a real conversation of like flipping that and the ways in which
Yeah.
maybe parents are connected to your student ministry before a student feels fully engaged or connected. I think sometimes 20 years ago, 15, maybe even 10 years ago, it was like, these kids are coming. Where are their parents at? But now a lot of kids aren't showing up places that parents themselves don't feel safe. And so if you
Right.
don't have a thoughtful orientation or like pipeline of like, well, this is the ways in which I'm going to put myself or our team in front of mom and dad. That's probably really significant beyond just we had this thing and the kids really wanted to come to it. And so
Mm.
it's not that it
Yeah.
wasn't there, but it's like a kind of a realigning of priorities, or at least connection points in student ministry that we're looking at.
Do you feel like, and that's great. I mean, we were talking like, hey, let's talk about what kind of changes we're seeing. I think you're right. This is a massive one that we're seeing on a bigger scale. You guys have done this for a long time too. I mean, I remember early on. Now, granted, I was a youth pastor at 18, so I needed parents because I couldn't drive the rental car.
Yeah.
And right,
I
like,
couldn't sign the check for the renting of the bounce houses. That's right.
couldn't
I need
sign
a
checks.
cosign.
Like, I needed parents because there were things that I wasn't old enough to do.
Yeah.
And maybe that was the extent of it. As I became a parent, I think that perspective for me shifted, and then it became, how do I intentionally pull them in? So, like, part of me feels like personally, parents have been a pretty big priority for a while, but I do feel like that conversation across the board now has tipped.
Well, I think it's because we had to find ways to connect with our students, because one of the things that is notorious about students today is you either hear from them when they're excited or you don't hear from them. And I think that's a generational shift of, man, I sent stuff out, I posted, I left a comment, I sent a message, and I just haven't heard from them. And I think there's some communication, generational connection things that, at least if mom like missed a call, she might call you back.
Right.
Like, you might
Right.
actually hear from, like, hey, like, they left dad's phone number, I called his cell and he missed the call, but he actually returned the call. And so I think, again, some of those things, not just the safety concerns of having, the waivers and the emergency contact, but it may be a place to build a relationship, especially for folks. And this is one of the things that we've noticed. Some of the folks that are now new in ministry are not young in ministry. So the
Yeah.
18-year-old Jody who graduated high school and is now promoted from intern to associate minister is less and less the case. A lot of folks that are youthful or young in ministry are a part of larger programs, either as interns or in a structured residential kind of way. A lot of the folks that are new in ministry are a little bit older themselves. So I talk about the middle school minister at our church. He's only been in ministry per se for 6 to 7 years, but he's in his late 50s because it's a second career thing for him. So he just, he has huge, like, 27-year-old energy, but he just naturally connects with parents easier because he's closer in parents' age than he is with teenager age. And I think there's a little bit of that energy. And, like, we always used to talk about youth ministry as being like cultural translation of like, the 15-year-olds talk like this. Let's get a 27-year-old in here that can, like, convert that up, but it may be the other way. And so I think there's some interesting, again, that still is a middle person of relational authority and mentorship, but some of the flow chart may have changed. And so I think those are some of the things that we're looking at. So,
Yeah, that's interesting. I've realized, like, the last couple of years, my favorite thing to do now, which I would have never believed that I would have said, is a parent meeting.
yeah.
Like, I love them.
Yeah.
Like, I
It's my
just,
people.
I just love, that sounds so weird. Like, even to say that out loud sounds weird, but I just love them. We did one, and look, we're in a larger context, multi-site deal now. And so, like, some of our parent meetings are everybody, y'all come, right? So we did one to kick off our small group year, man. And the room is packed. People are coming in, and I'm excited that I know we've got a lot of students on campus because I heard them, but I'm excited that I have a room full of parents and being able to walk through that and with them, and even some of the training things and things, communication that we're leaning into. Man, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. And part of that maybe is because, like, to your point earlier, we have parents who, and I don't mean this critically, they don't know how to parent biblically, right? And so you're kind of telling them, you're walking them through things. And where I am in life right now, a parent of teens and beyond, I'm not just the youth guy anymore. Like, I am, we're in it. I'm one of you. Like, we're in it together.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's very true. And not in a demeaning way, but I think it's important that we are mindful that when we ask somebody to do something very broad, if they've never seen it or been taught it, like, we shouldn't have the expectation that it's intuitive.
Yeah.
And when we say phrases to parents like, you're to disciple your teenager, I think a lot of them are lost on that because it's never been modeled to them. It's never been shown to them. And for the majority of them, they grew up in a time that you just got to church.
Yeah.
And so
That
that's
was the discipleship plan. Showing
correct.
up to church was the discipleship plan.
Well, and
Yes.
and I even think that the way that if we're not careful, some of the ways that we teach discipleship is solely that. Like you come to this class and you learn discipleship. And so for a mom and dad to replicate that, they've got to try to pull off a class inside of their own
Their
home, and
house.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that feels very, unnatural to many of them. It does not feel like the relationship with their teenager that's already probably struggling to connect with, and so there's frustration on both ends, and I think for a lot of parents that maybe are willing to take the first step and try something, and then they get immediate pushback from their teenager, the feeling is very much, "Well, I can't do this, I'm not good at this, I'm just going to quit." And
Yeah.
and I think if we're not careful as youth ministers, even subconsciously, we're communicating this, right? Like, if the only
Mhm.
form of communication that your parents ever hear from you is, forms are due on August 26th, make sure your kid's here at 6 o'clock. You know what I mean? Don't forget this. Like, we're communicating to them what it looks like to partner with the church. And their
Yeah.
role in partnering with the church is simply just showing up and make sure that all the forms are there. And so, like, we're subconsciously teaching them how to disciple, or at least necessarily maybe not how to disciple, but how to partner with us. And I
Yeah.
think you mentioned it when you were younger, and I think that that's very true. We can often look at partnership with the family in a very self-serving role of like, when we say partnership, it just means I'd love to have you as an extra volunteer leader and make sure that your kid picks this over baseball to boost my
Yeah, come to
numbers.
our thing. That we like. Please partner with us. Please patron our stuff. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
not very
Yeah.
good partnership. I
It's not a equal partnership. Right.
yeah,
Right. Right. Hey, Molly. I noticed you haven't been to our stuff recently. Yeah, we've been really busy with. We had family vacay and volleyball really picked up. And you're like,
right.
Well, I sure would love to see you more at our stuff.
Right. It's kinda like the
And
same way that,
meanwhile,
like,
yeah.
Amazon partners with my family, you know what I mean? It's just like, "Would you like to buy this?" You're like, "I guess
Yeah.
I will."
Yeah. I'll
Yeah.
give you money
We
for
would
that
love
thing.
to deliver the things you've paid for. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. What about, let's circle back. I totally love this, and I agree. I think parent ministry has become more important than ever. I'm so encouraged that it's talked about so much now too.
Mhm.
I mean, I can remember back in the day it was Reggie Joyner, right? Just kind of probably early on championing that some, and it's grown, and which is I think we're realizing we can't do this without them. The model was broken. You mentioned, Zach, kind of youth pastors stepping in older.
Yeah.
Like, what are some of the reasons you guys think that's happening? And let me say this, is there still a place for the 23, 24, 22-year-old,
So to
right?
answer your second question first, 100%, 100%. I think the three-ish things that have shifted is there was a big class of 20 somethings that kind of like the first the end of the millennial thing, the first of the Gen Z thing, kind of that generational boundary that in the 2016, 17 were coming of age as ministers. And one of the things that we noticed during COVID is that a lot of them got moved into new roles. There was some new ground to take either in online or groups or discipleship. Whereas maybe 10, 15 years ago, maybe even 20 years ago, a lot of those young ministry folks were moving into roles like church planters or moving into roles like missions. What happened in between 2019 and 2022 is I think there was a lot of teams that kind of reshuffled the deck. And so maybe that youth minister became the next gen minister or the media minister or the online or the campus pastor. There's so many new kind of innovations and roles that they had to backfill that role. Well, the second thing that happened is that the budget got shifted as well. And so having a full-time youth minister wasn't as balancing of the budget maybe they wanted. So they were looking for someone who was either part-time or a heavily invested volunteer. And so if you're looking for someone who's part-time, heavily invested volunteer, you're probably not getting an early career person. You're probably getting someone who's bivocational, co-vocational, or some of the stories that we've heard. It's the mom who was the stay-at-home mom with teenage kid that was already kind of helping out anyway. They moved her into a more prominent role. Or one of our members in Booster is a returning missionary. She had served on the field for a few years and now she's back, wants to do ministry and doing ministry at home, but she's, 32, not 22. So, very theologically trained and very missionally minded, but not out of Bible college. She's coming for something else. And so several young men that are, insurance salesmen, or they're firefighters that are, they have like a gap in their schedule where they can faithfully serve in kind of some like bursts or some certain patterns. And I think that's one of the things, because the third thing that I think has really shifted is that youth ministry, I hope, continues to see less emphasis on being dogmatically programmatic. I think one of the things from 2010, 2009, like when everybody got a cell phone, the initial gut response of youth ministry was like, okay, they're busy on their phones. The only thing that we can do is be busier than they are. And we'd have 3 or 4 opportunities a week, and we'd load them up with things to do, times to gather, and fun events, and this event and that event. And then in 2020, we could have no events. And I think coming back, there's been a recalibration of, well, special events are going to happen on the midweek or the Sunday times we're already gathering. So instead of having like an off schedule, like Saturday night, hangout or lock in or hayride, that's just what we're going to do on the Wednesday or the Sunday. And so I think there's less frequency of stuff happening, which allows folks to commit to the time that they have. Because in 2014, 2015, you had to be full time to the ministry just to keep up with the schedule that you planned for yourself. And so I think there's a little more of an adjustment of, we don't have to meet in person every possible moment. I can communicate through the means that we have, through text and group and post and video. And so it's not a lack of connection opportunities, so that when we do gather, it can be engaging for the gathering that it is, instead of just trying to gather everybody to see who's still around. I think that's a big shift. So those 3 things in a post-COVID world, I think, are really shifting some of the staffing solutions, but also the habits of meeting and the ways in which we get connected.
Would you still say, I'm throwing a curveball in this conversation for a moment. Would you still say, though, that like your midweek gathering is the like primary like focus for most student ministries? What do you guys think?
I mean,
I mean, whether it's Wednesday or like that large group, like
Friday, Sunday, it would be
we're gonna do
Sunday
3
morning
songs,
time.
a talk, and a game, right? Like, is that still the primary focus for most student ministries? Not all, but like the majority.
I think I would say yes, because I think that's largely the expectation of senior leadership in churches, right? So I think, yes, I think there's a value to it, but I also think that there is this expectation that there will be that. For us, it's a little unique in the sense that one of our campuses meets on a school site, right? It's set up, tear down, church in a box. So we split the programming there still. So we have a Sunday morning kind of large group time, and then Wednesday small groups in homes. For our other campuses, everything for us happens on Wednesday. We offer no programming on Sunday at all.
Okay.
And we're pushing them to the service. Now, we're not a Sunday school model, right? Like some churches would be.
Right.
If we were, we would offer something there, but it's just the services that are happening. Small groups for us happens church-wide throughout the week. So we shifted on those other campuses to everything. So Wednesday night for us, then on those campuses, is the large group teaching for junior high, the large group teaching for high school, and small groups across the campus. And we've put all our eggs in that basket.
So that is the shift. I think that's probably the thing to note, Chad, is that there's not a split of, well, program happens on midweek, small groups happens on Sunday. I think for a lot of folks, I'd be curious to ask if anybody that has, there's probably still some that would do like a Sunday morning group or Sunday school model. But because so many folks have moved to like a weekend corporate worship, like this is when like literally Sunday morning feels like kids and everybody else, and then midweek feels like students and volunteers. And so because that's the case, there's been a little bit of like we're funneling all of it into it. But even for some, like that large group teaching may be a monthly move. Like this is the introduction
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
series that for the next 2 or 3 weeks is going to be group heavy, or we may not,
Right.
we may have a large group like activity, fun moment, game into like a short kind of introduction and then group time.
Right.
But again, they're kind of, there's a folding into like that thing that happens, whatever's going to happen is all going to happen at this time weekly instead of groups on Sunday, large group teaching program on Wednesday, and then like leadership on Sunday night. Like that's
Yeah.
the 3 a week model.
Well,
it
and
used to be.
the reason I ask is I think that was one of the things that COVID should have taught us. We've probably already, not all of us, but many of us have forgotten the lessons, the good lessons that can come out of something like that. And I think the thing that it revealed very quickly was without a gathering, we don't have much else. Like, just to
Yeah.
be very frank and step on toes, it was like, if I can't get everybody in this room, I have no
What am I going
way.
to do? What am
Yeah,
I going to say?
I have no way to like carry out discipleship or continue to help people grow because we've kind of created this system where it is like you either show up or you don't. And I think that that's a little bit why there is like the hair on our neck raises when the kids don't show up is because like how else are
That
we
was our
supposed to
thing.
that was our thing, right? Like you've got to be here for it to continue to happen. And yes, that is a vital part, I think, in all of our even relationship of community and the church and those kind of things. But I also think that there has to be some elements that students understand. Like I'm also learning to read the word at home by myself. I am
Yeah.
engaging in prayer at home and myself. As parents, they're equipped to carry conversation at home, to model these things at home, that we're mindful of, how do we actually help the kid reach a soccer team, right? Like that
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
feels
Yeah.
equipped and empowered to do that, that it's not just come and gather. And I think if we were observant enough, that is a lesson that COVID taught us all, because when everything shut down and you look around and you're like, "Well, what are they doing with their time?
Mhm.
And how do I engage with them?" And even the way that we tried to like carry on everything during COVID, it was just like, we'll set up a camera and do the thing that we do to an empty room
Right?
so
We'll
you can
film it from
see
at
it.
home.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
we didn't even try to reinvent that or do it in a different way that was like thoughtful of, okay, how does this come off to a family that's sitting on a couch watching this, maybe even huddled around an iPad? It was just like, no, we're just going to do the same thing that we always do and put a camera in the back of.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's so two of the things that I think are really important for youth ministry to analyze today. One, youth ministry has always been the kind of the ground of innovation. Like
Mhm.
that's youth ministry was born because it was like there are passionate young people, and if we don't allow them the flexibility, fluidity to try some things different or respond differently, we're going to lose them.
Yeah.
And one of the things that concerns me about the program the most is it feels more like we're copying Sunday than leading the
Yeah.
charge for what Sunday could be. Like the coolest thing that's ever happened is that Sunday morning at almost every church in America has gotten rapidly more engaging and exciting. Like the songs are more singable. The messages feel more like whatever that war was, it was won. And now youth ministry sometimes in some places feels like a juniorized version of Sunday instead of being an innovative edge. Because I think the second thing that youth ministry has to learn is that we aren't going to be innovative in the ways in which we do production. Like students' phones and apps and Xboxes and TikTok are far more entertaining and produced than you could ever be. Like with the exception of maybe 4 churches in America, like you will not out entertain, but you might be able to out relate. And that's one of the things. It's hard, it's messy, it's smaller, and it's less measurable. But the ways in which a student can not just be marketed at, but known, like not just know about them in a algorithmic kind of way, but know about them in a sharing or a place sharing kind of way, long suffering, to use a longer haul term, a long suffering. That's one of the things youth ministry might be able to be. And I think
Hmm.
it's an important shift. I don't have like a ready-made solution because I don't think there is one. I think it's a contextual one. But that's the emphasis that I would want to put my ministry leadership investment in, or push my chips across the table on, because I don't think we're going to outprogram, because you're never going to, if the church has a full budget for worship ministry, you all know you're getting hand-me-down whatever. So it's going to be
Yeah.
really hard to have a
Yeah.
cooler show on midweek when they have all the lights. Now I know for some folks, like, we're utilizing the large group space on midweek that they have on Sunday. So we do have the same access. Super cool. But one of the ways in which I think we can lead the charge for the church, the Big C church, is to reclaim some relational ground that maybe we had given up in the name of producing service or content or happening instead of relationship and gathering.
Well, and I think
Yeah.
I think that those kind of things are very important now post COVID, but I think are going to become even more important
Even more so.
the further we get into a world of AI and deep fake and all of those kind of things, because we're already seeing we're already seeing a society where trust of other individuals is very, very low.
Yes.
And we're constantly on social media, we're constantly looking for the fight. And I think creating an environment where relationship of being known and knowing someone is unbelievably important. Okay,
Mm.
truth time. 2 days ago, I made the mistake, okay? I will own it 100%. The light turned green, I was turning left. I did not have a protected arrow. I was off into thought, and I went to turn and cut someone off. The
How dare
cutest
you?
Yeah, I know, I'm a horrible person.
Are you sure you're not a California driver?
Yeah, right. No,
Ah.
I'm the cutest, like, 20-year-old, like, like sorority-looking girl is in her little Honda Civic and just throws me the double middle fingers, okay? Like, hard.
You're
With
number one.
authority. Yeah, with a 5'3"
Yeah.
authority.
And I waved and did the whole, like, Southern,
Yeah,
like,
you did.
mouthed, "I'm
Oh,
sorry," kinda thing, you know what I mean?
bless your heart.
But
Yeah.
yeah. But I was thinking about that. I mean, here this young lady is, protected by 2 glasses and a distance apart, is, I mean, willing to make this unbelievably offensive gesture, right? Out
Right.
of my mistake, I get it, all of those kind of things. But there is no doubt in my mind, if we're both out of our cars and I
Yeah.
bump into her, right? That's not her reaction to me, right? Like, we're
Right.
not
Right.
standing there where we can vocalize, talk to each other, and she's throwing up double fingers.
Yeah.
I think what we've seen for years and years of road rage is exactly what social media has played out to be. When you have the inability
Behind
to
the safety of the glass.
it's behind the safety of the glass. It's the ability to be able to communicate to someone without them knowing you and feeling like there's not consequence. Because at the end of the day, I can just delete that post. I can just block that
Yeah.
person so I can say whatever I want without an actual trust of relationship. And I think more and more we get down the road in this, the ability to communicate to mass without the, I don't even wanna call it repercussions, but, like, without the ability to have community with the people you're talking to, allows you to have this safety of the glass where you can do whatever you want, say whatever you
Yeah.
want, horrible things. And so I think creating place where there can be trust and unity built is gonna be very, very important, and I think it could be very unique inside of the church, that we could become a place where, like, great conversation can happen, and being known and
Yeah.
understanding what it means to trust somebody again could hopefully, in some ways, heal our society.
Hmm. Yeah. I will say one thing too, and maybe this is, man, it's so hard for me to have a broader perspective. You guys would be able to speak to this much more. I think it feels like there's a greater sense of purpose in what we're doing than before, where
Yeah.
maybe before we just did what we did because that's what you do, right? And so, like, even thinking through like our midweek program, how we're doing that and what we're doing there is purposely trying to prepare those students to leave that and be able to plug in and serve in the larger service. We're pushing our students out to serve more and more in the broader scope of our ministry. We're looking beyond. And that shift, again, back to even where we started, one of the reasons we moved off the weekend was so that our families would worship together. Because the reality was I would come in, I would go to the area where our students did our service. Parents would come, they'd file off in different directions. Students would come to us. We'd do a full service for them. Parents were in the service. Service would end. They'd go home, and I would never see or talk to a parent at all unless they were mad.
Yeah.
And so, I think we've made some healthy shifts, but it just feels like there's more thought and purpose.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's much innovation, though. Like, I think we're still trying to copy what we see others do.
Well, and I think some of that, again, we talked about pre-show. When you don't know what to do, you fall into the trap that Chad was sharing, which is not outrage or you're crowdsourcing your one-to-many frustration, but crowdsource my many-to-one help or comparison. Like, I don't know what to do. What's everybody else doing? It's the Google approach to solutions as opposed to the contextual approach. Because, again, it can be overwhelming. And so, like, just tell me what to do. Just tell me what to do. Just tell me what to do. And I think some of the cooling or the help that we can give is, man, you don't have to know all of it. And some of what you may need to do in the future may be a little bit dug down, buried, rooted up in the past. I think that's one of the things that the more and more we move quicker and quicker, I think we miss more and more of what maybe God was trying to teach, show, do, form in the life of the early church. And so I think that, like, one of the best things, and Chad's heard me say this before, that, like, if everything in your student's life has gotten really fast and noisy, maybe the best thing that you could do is not to try to be louder or run quicker, but to speak softly and slower. I think there's the old line, like, when everybody else yells, what do? Whisper. And I think that's one of the things that, like, the permission to hear that, like, we can say that we've been doing it for 20 years, guys. I mean, this is the shift that we're making. But if you're 2 months in, you're like, oh, I got to establish my voice by yelling loud. And I think there's some things and some wisdom that for those that are listening that have been in ministry for a while, this is the way that we can kind of fold that back on for those that are newer, is that maybe the biggest thing that you can do, the longest play that you can make, is not what you're doing right now or tonight for this midweek, but in the longer view, the bigger, broader approach. I think that's what you're sharing, Jody, about, like, the stakes are higher. Because I think we are able to see a little bit more of the curvature of, what we're doing is formational work. Like, we're not just, it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked for the life of the church, for youth ministry to make better churchgoers. Like we are proof today that just because we were really good at getting the church doesn't mean that that is the thing that is the most substantial. So we have to double down on something else. And I think it has to be the ways in which they're being formed and their willingness to ask the big questions, which, again, Chad was sharing, like, everybody's temperature is up a little bit. Everybody is a little more frustrated or talking. Like, this is not like, can we talk about that? I don't know, brother, but they are. So whatever you want to do, because they are talking about. I remember back in the day, it was like, should we have, like, a sex and dating series? I don't know, man, but they're talking about it now. So it's whatever you think you and your team need to do, because if you don't, they're still going to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
I think a good evaluation tool is really looking at each of our ministries and simply asking, like, what are ways that we're demonstrating, offering, and celebrating the fruits of the Spirit on an ongoing basis. Like is there peace? You know what I mean? On Wednesday night. Now I know, like, if you're hosting a middle school, service, and you're asked the question, is there peace? Like, you may have to ask that question in different ways, but I think that I think helping students in an anxious world understand where to run to for peace and what peace can actually feel like,
Yeah.
is a very healthy and important thing for and so
And especially for families, right? Like, I mean, we talk about the chaos of the student's world, but so much of that gets absorbed into the family.
Mhm.
And so you talk to students and it's just like the family is just loud. I mean, the noise of the busyness of family, the chaos that it just seems to ensue. And so
Yep.
being able to lean in there. Yeah, that's good. Well, I want to be mindful of your time. How about this before we kind of wrap up here? Is there, and I should have prepped you for this, but I didn't because, I don't ever.
We're here for throw us the curve. Yeah.
No, is there a resource that you would think of off the top of your head that would be kind of relevant and helpful for listeners that you throw out?
Well, Longer Haul and Youth Ministry Podcast, this episode, and I'm assuming all of the ones to
All
follow.
the other, yeah,
all the ones to follow. No, I mean, I think the conversation stuff. I mean, Chad and I are trying to have some of these conversations over on the Youth Ministry Booster podcast. Some books I was trying to think of, inside of our booster network. We are reading Generations by Gene Twenge, which is really good. And then The Relational Soul by Plass, I think are some books that are really helpful and thoughtful. Jared, remind me of Jared's last name, Chad, for the groups book that you guys did Bucks together, his new groups book.
Jared Musgrove's book.
Jared Musgrove's new book about groups. I think it's called Groups.
Yeah, I think it's Groups.
The sample copy I got was very good. I think for folks that are trying to imagine what groups look like, that's often the unit of measure. In a post-programmatic youth ministry, groups becomes the new measuring stick.
Yeah.
And so I think having some real intentionality behind how your groups are organizing, and if they're succeeding on the metrics that you set, I think that's, not to have another episode conversation, but like when you're going to have a group, the thing that often is the challenge of the group is like it isn't going well, but you didn't set up what going well looks like. And so they just, like, if the kids talked or didn't talk, sometimes the best small groups are pretty silent because the room is heavy and prayerful. And so I think being able to equip leaders with language around like why this group gathers and what a good version of this group looks like is really significant.
We talked quite a bit, I think, around about this topic, but like discipleship at home for many students, it's like, how do I even start? Specifically ones that are like new believers. We have a new guide and discipleship book called Follower by Kyle Wilkshire. Is he named as author on that?
It's
Yeah,
on
he
the
is.
inside cover, but Follower, Lifeway students, but Kyle Wilkshire is the principal author. Yeah. It was
Yeah.
a little bit of a team effort, but he's the principal author.
But that's just a great guide that you would give a student who's like brand new to the faith. Like that I think whether it's that resource by us or dude, anything that you can find, I think that's such an important thing to do with a new student who becomes a believer, that we immediately start to help them find the tools of what it means to walk faithfully with God in a way that's not programmatic. And I think that whether it's that resource or whatever it is, I think helping students either have resources or have someone that will walk with them patiently is so important. The first year or two of that.
If folks listening want to connect with you, find you, what's the best way for them to do that outside of this episode?
Emails are good. So first name dot last name at lifeway.com. So Zac.Workun at lifeway.com or Chad.Higgins at
Chad.Higgins.
Okay.
And
you mentioned
Instagram,
the podcast.
So Youth Ministry Booster, send us a DM on the Instagram if you want to. I'm happy to answer those.
We're now on YouTube. We've ventured into the YouTube space. Dude.
Like beardy faces more often.
I'm 6 months away from just doing TikTok dances too. So
that's a scary thought.
Hashtag Chad. Yeah.
Cool. Well, guys, thanks again. I know we're going to be hanging out here in a few days, so I'm excited to do that. Thanks for jumping on. I know it was helpful. A lot of stuff. We could probably talk about this forever, but again, you guys, and
if we get an invite back sometime, before 8 years, we maybe could
in
do
the next
that.
8 years. Yeah.
I think I think we've set the precedent. I think we've set the precedent. It's just an every 8 year thing.
That's fine.
That's all.
That's fine.
That's fine.
You know, it's like it's biblical, right? Like every 7 years. This is our jubilee. So
Yeah.
happy
Well, what we
Jubilee.
do is we'll just every 4 we'll rotate. You come on this,
Okay.
then I'll come on yours. Then
Yep,
and that
that's
way
good.
it's
That's
it's
good.
still an 8-year, but it's
Yep.
not doesn't feel as long. So
Yeah, it's good.
anyway, cool.
We've
Well,
got to
thanks,
start.
guys. I
We've got to
appreciate
start
it.
doing guest again. We don't do guest
That's
anymore.
true.
Oh yeah.
Maybe I'll
Well,
get sick and Zach will bring you on.
Or we just fly Jody to Oklahoma to film in the garage. Oh, sorry,
Hey.
studio.
I'm growing the beard
Yes.
out so I
Come
can
on,
fit
man.
in.
Oh,
you know?
sub in, just a guest booster.
I'll just pretend.
I like
Hey,
that.
I'm
Yeah.
not just saying this because we're on a podcast. If you ever were in Oklahoma, you would be one of the few dudes that we would say, dude, jump in this third chair and get in here with us.
100%.
So,
100%.
I appreciate it. We'll have to make it happen. I'll figure out how to get to Oklahoma.
That'd be awesome.
Come on.
So anyway, thanks guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Have a great rest of the day. And, I'll see you in a few days, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there you have it. Man, love those guys so much. Just so thankful for their friendship, their investment over the years in so many youth pastors. It does seem like just yesterday we were starting our podcast. It's hard to believe it's been as long as it has, but thankful for them. You know, they in so many ways embody the longer haul as they're still at this, not just working along youth pastors and youth leaders, but even in the podcast. So anyway, grateful to have them on today. Thanks for joining us. As always, make sure you head over to thelongerhaul.com, check out the show notes there. Make sure you subscribe and follow, and we'll see you in the next episode.